Right. Zante is Cass. Got to remember that. Cass.
It still won't change it. My thing is, even when I exit out and go back in, it still says my kid's name, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, no worries. I just got to remember that going forward. But it's great to have you. Yeah, we're live. So, um, what's up, everybody, and welcome to another Mumbo Jumbo Community Conversations. My name is Chinyelu. I'll be our conversation facilitator today, as we continue our book study of Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. This is our third session. We'll be looking at chapters 13 through 18, uh, beginning of chapter 13 through the end of chapter 18. So we got one more session after this. Very, very excited. But for now, let's go ahead and get it started for today. Uh, for those of you who may be, watching the recording, I don't think we have anybody new on the live stream, but for those of you who may be like watching the recording or who may be watching the live stream on YouTube and who aren't as familiar with how we do things here in the Kepler space, we always start all of our meetings and community gatherings with a check-in. There's just a little ritual that we have to make sure that, we're maintaining an awareness of each other, that we're all thinking about where everybody's at, what anybody might need, and just so that we know what we need to do to, take care of each other and be there for each other as a community. So what that typically looks like is everybody will go around and give their number and their color, and there'll typically be a an icebreaker question as well, something that helps us get to know each other on a little bit more of a little bit more in depth. Nas, we got somebody at the door. So I typically like to do a check-in question that's related to the topic. I think the last few times we've done something asking how much of the book people have read. I think that the group we have now, I know the answer for everybody, so I won't ask that one again. Um, so maybe instead let's say the check-in question today is how do you feel about change? Yeah, we can keep it a little bit broad today, but how do you feel about change? Who would like to start us off?
I can start.
Go for it,
Uh,
Miss Betty.
are we doing colors and that kind of thing too? Because I kind of,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, so my color today is beige, kind of neutral feeling today. And my number was probably about an 8. And how do I feel about change? Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. So change can be good and change can be bad. So bottom line is though, uh, it's inevitable. So we just need to learn to roll with the punches.
I know that's right. And then you can go ahead and pass it to the next person.
Okay, how about Miss Pambana? Are you here?
Mama Pambana, if you're talking, we can't quite hear you. Although normally she has her camera on too, so maybe she stepped away for a second.
No, I'm
Oh,
here. Is Paula had
hey,
just called me in, so I was sharing with her that I'm on this. So I'm a
all
Sunlight
good.
White Infinity, and I mean, change. I agree is a natural part of life, and so again, sort of like Betty said, it depends. But for the most part, I guess I say I welcome change. Like I can remember being a kid and wanting to grow up. And I felt like it didn't come fast enough. And then watching my grandkids grow up and stuff like that. So that's fun, but I think most of the time it's when maybe change is really sudden or you're not aware of it or something that really dramatically affects you emotionally and spiritually. That's the difficult thing to handle. But like, going to school, going to college, getting married, having kids, all that kind of stuff, you kind of expect that, but other things that come up and you don't. So I feel like change is a natural part of life, and either you change and grow or you die. I'll pass it to Cat. And I'm gonna go back to eating, y'all. So I'm gonna turn my video off and my audio.
Do your thing.
Hey everybody. Let's see. My color today about like I'd say about a greenish blue, like kind of feel a bit homesick today, but um, overall it was a pretty good day. Let me see. Change. Well, all I know is like you can't change. So, only, change can change you, but you can't change. So, you just have to roll with it. I know that there's times in my life where I welcome a good change, but it's only when, the change is, as I perceive it, negative, is when I'm just like, why can't things just stay the same? But, nothing ever really stays the same. So, um, I just, try to adjust and keep it moving because again, like they were saying, if you don't change, you die. So, you got to keep it moving. And I will pass it to, let's see. Actually, I'll pass it to somebody over there because I don't see anyone else online that hasn't gone.
Yeah. You take it.
I'm feeling green. What else? Sarah.
Yeah, number, color, and then how do you feel about change?
Change is scary. Number.
Yeah.
12.
And then pass it to the next person.
Okay, today I'm feeling, let's say, kind of blue gray. Um, I guess my number would be 10. Been productive. Um, and then what's the other one? How do I
How do
feel?
you feel about change?
Um, I agree it can be scary, but it's necessary, and I think that in times of change is when I know I grow the most, and I think people become more resilient through change. So we do it afraid.
You mind telling us your name as well?
Autumn Lowry.
Autumn. Oh,
Mhm.
you've been on
From the Ground Up Foods, yeah,
nice,
on the
nice.
cohort.
Good to meet you in person.
You too.
Yeah. We got a few people off camera today, so you may hear some voices of people that you don't see. Yeah, just know that there are friends here in the physical space. Um, I can go ahead and take it. What's up, y'all? I'm feeling like a street sign green, feeling like a 7 today. I'm feeling all right. And yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said. You know, change is inevitable, it's unavoidable, but it's also deeply, deeply uncomfortable, sometimes even painful. But I think that part of like, and we'll talk about this a little bit today, I think, but like part of like being a human, part of being alive is sort of embracing some of those, uncomfortable and sometimes painful things because, that's just part of being human. And I'll pass it over to our second friend second out of frame friend. Hello.
Hello. Okay, tell me my prompts.
Yeah, number, color, how do you feel about change? And then if you wouldn't mind sharing your name with us as well.
Number, color. How do I feel about change? Number 17, color blue. Um, change. Uh, I guess I think nothing exists without it. So it's a necessity, mostly. And then my name is Summer Burks. Hello, everyone.
Good to see you, Summer.
You too.
Okay. And then just you can just pass it to the next person. Khaled hasn't gone yet, but then we got Jeru and Alvin who just joined us as well. Nas still needs to go, so it's up to you. Summer? Yeah, just pick the next person.
Nas.
Hey y'all, Nas here, over here on Sound tonight. Check in Purple 9.5, my usual, and change. I look at it as an aspect and a necessary part of life. And I'm gonna keep it short and simple. Alvin, I'm gonna pass it off to you.
Hello, everybody. What was the check-in question again?
How you feel about change?
I am change. I'm good with it.
And then number and color
Keeping
as
you
well.
too. I'm feeling like it's been a busy day. Probably 7 electric yellow, and I'll pass it to Tara.
Hi. Um, I'm feeling like a brown 777. And how do I feel about change? Um, I think of it, feel of it. I don't know. It reminds me of something that's necessary and fluid and um, yeah, it just always changes forms. Change form. Okay. And who hasn't gone? Who's left?
Sound is M there with you guys?
He's in the back room or bathroom. I think he's coming in now.
Is he coming up?
Okay, sounds
Oh,
good. J Roos. Oh, he's here?
I think he's coming.
What up? What up? My color is lime. My number's 11. What's the check-in question?
How do you feel about change?
I love change.
You would. And then I think J Roos still hasn't gone. And I think after that it's just me and Khalid.
Yeah, hey everybody. Sorry, Miss Watt. I'm a red, black, and today, maybe even 11, maybe 12, maybe even 13. When I think about change, uh, I feel like change is one of those things that we only find uncomfortable because we frame it through a human experience. We're always changing. I'm a firm believer in the idea of empathy, and that we are just burning all this energy down until there's nothing left. Um, and yeah, in many ways, change is a necessity. And, even thinking about the uncomfortability of it too, it's only uncomfortable when it goes against what we think should be happening. So if you change from a poor person to a billionaire tomorrow, you're probably not going to be too uncomfortable with that change, are you? So I think, it's ultimately just about like reframing how we experience change, and even what we perceive as good and bad. As it relates to that. I'll
Deep,
pass it
man. Thank you.
back inside. Oh, thank you. That means a lot. Thank you, my number one deep thinker.
Yeah, I'll take it. What's up, y'all? I think nope, I said mine already. Khalid, you're our last person. So I'll pass it over to you.
Um, I'm a green 5, and honestly, I just think about adapting to it.
Only thing to do. Wonderful. Thanks everybody for checking in. As usual, we may have some more people join us here in the physical space or in the virtual space as the conversation continues. And if so, we'll just wait for the natural pauses in the conversation to let them get their check-ins in as well. But for now, let's go ahead and get started with our discussion. As always, uh, we'll do, if you haven't read the book all the way through, that's totally fine. That said, we can only do our best in terms of spoilers, especially during this group of chapters, because this is when shit gets crazy. So, if you're about to, I'm gonna give like just sort of like an outline, just sort of like broad strokes of what happens in each chapter. Um, yeah, if anybody, as we're like talking about it, if anybody feels like they're about to say something that may be a spoiler, let us know so that anybody who, isn't caught up can close their ears or whatever they want to do. But yeah, we'll do our best. But cool. So let's go ahead and get into it. So we left off last session with chapter 12. That was the chapter where Lauren loses her dad. The Garfield family gets accepted to the Olivar town, the company town. And so we pick up in chapter 13, which ends with a quote that I thought was just real, which begins with a verse from the books of the living that I thought was really powerful, which is just, there is no end to what a living world will demand of you. Yeah. So let's see what else happens in chapter 13. So chapter 13 is Lauren's dad's funeral officially. In chapter 12, she sort of like preaches a sermon in his place, which to her is basically the funeral, but they hold an official service and acknowledge that he's not coming back in chapter 13. This is also the chapter where the Garfield family, including Lauren's friend Joan and her family, actually leave to go join the factory town. Um, we also meet Lauren. Well, we don't meet Curtis here, Lauren's love interest, but we do get a pretty deep exchange between them, just about them discussing sort of like what their plans are. At this point, both of them are basically like, we can't keep living here as things are. But then there's also the question of like, okay, but if we leave, then what? So there's sort of this back and forth about like, okay, do we leave? Do we leave together? Curtis learns that Lauren had been planning on leaving on her own, and that's a bit of an emotional exchange. And then they talk about, well, we want to get married, so like, what if we stayed here to take care of your family? How long could that work? And so, just two young people just sort of kind of trying to figure out a way to navigate this situation together in the face of all this loss and grief. And speaking of loss and grief, um, as we've established in some of the previous chapters, this community is far from safe within its like walled setting, but we get another pretty severe like incident of attack in this chapter when someone sets a fire to the Payne Parish house, and while the community is rushing to respond to the fire, three of the houses get robbed. So um, we learn that along with some of the essential stuff that gets stolen from some of the houses, Wardell Parrish is the only member of that household to survive. His twin sister and all of her children, unfortunately, do not make it out, and that basically it just wrecks him, and he ends up leaving the community shortly after, just because he can't stand to be there anymore. And then we learn about Corey, Lauren's stepmom, taking on Lauren's dad's job at the university. She basically like works it out with some of the other people that she knew from his job, that know her from when she used to teach there, to be like, okay, I'll teach his courses in his absence for work because they need to support themselves somehow. Lauren takes over Corey's job, which is basically just like as a school teacher for their little community. And then and yeah, so we just kind of like see this community sort of adapting to this new reality, this new structure, and everybody just sort of trying to cope as best they can. So um, yeah, so I'll open it up for now. I think anybody have any thoughts or reflections that they want to give on chapter 13? And just as for some transparency here on my part, I drank a big cup of coffee right before this, and so I'm going to let you guys get the conversation rolling, and I'm going to step out to use the bathroom real quick. So yeah, anybody wanna start it off? Chapter 13. What about this verse at the beginning? This, there is no end to what a living world will demand of you. How do people interpret that? There is
Yeah,
no
I can
end
get
to
us
what a
going
living
here.
world will demand of you. Go for it, J. Rue.
Yeah, I really like that quote. And it's something that I feel like I've really had to come to terms with here recently. Because, when I first started at Kepler, and even still today, in many regards, y'all, I was dropping the ball on many projects. I don't know if I had success, one successful project launch in like the first 3 or 4 years of me being there. And something we joke about now is like, as I've gained confidence and as I've gained, different skills and ability to perform, the um, the price, or I guess I could say the reward for good work is always going to be more work, right? There's always the next place to get to, the next hurdle to overcome. And life is going to constantly be presenting different challenges, especially if you're a person with a growth mindset of, how do I get to the next place? Even if you reach your dreams, now it's a matter of, well, what lies beyond that and what lies beyond that. And because of that, there's always going to be new challenges to conquer and overcome. So I really like that piece. I think it's definitely one of the most um, poignant verses in Earthseed to me. And yeah, I always just think of that kind of inside running joke in the Kepler space where the reward of good work is more shit to do and that shit to do after school. Definitely more to do even after.
Yeah, thank you, Jeru. No, that was deep. I heard you a little bit from the bathroom, and I think that idea of just like, there's always, everybody who is like, every adult knows the idea that there's just always something else. So, yeah, yeah,
Well, I want to speak to that because I feel like, at least for me, being on Earth is like a boot camp, but I believe I signed up for it. But also, whenever you talk about what is being presented to you, I always have to reflect on it in the context of a spectrum. And like I think all human beings are faced with challenges, and it demands that you either grow, or if you don't, you might suffer the consequence. But I know that what I've been presented to it with in my life is not as harsh as what other people have to deal with. So I don't think I can say that there's no end to what's been presented to me. I mean, I've had struggles, I've had challenges, I've had dark days, but they're nothing compared to what some other people have to deal with and go through. And I don't think it's nothing compared to like the experiences of slavery or the Holocaust or that kind of thing. So collectively, because we share intelligence, I believe, and experiences, even though we don't think about it, that's true for the whole human race, but not for the individual. So I often, like well, I'm gonna say often every day, I'm grateful and thankful that, the challenges that I had are minor compared to, some people having to sleep on the streets, not having a roof over their head, not having enough food to eat, being abused by other people, enslaved, like sex trade and all that kind of stuff. So for me, I have to put it in the perspective of the human race, and also looking at my individual life, that I've been really blessed not to have to deal with some horrendous stuff that other people have had to and are dealing with now.
yeah. I definitely think that awareness of, you know, that your experience is not the only experience, and that many people experience things that, you'll never have to. I think that that's another big part of that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, please. Maybe we should just move this mic over there. Y'all just keep that over there between y'all. Unless y'all want to join us at the tables. Yeah, I know. We'll move those chairs around the tables next time. Everybody likes those chairs.
I think as I've read through the book, so each of these opening parts that she puts in the poems or these excerpts, I kind of viewed them as, I guess, inspiration. So when I'm
Yeah.
reading this, I guess even through reading the book, I kept repositioning myself in the book and where I was at in it. So, was I the person on the outside? Was I the person on the inside? Was I rich? Was I, so I was kind of positioning myself in different places of what my outcome would have to be in this scenario. But this opening phrase to me, again, it's inspirational because to me, a living world is ever moving, ever changing. And so there's always something new to supply, to create, to as in demand, wanting something more because you want to create something more or to, just be something more, not because it's a standard, just because it's just innately to you to do it. So that's kind of how I've, not kind of, that's exactly how I've taken a lot of this. And that's what this one said to me.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I did that piece about like the idea of a living world, I think also tells you a lot about like the earth seed ideology. Um, and I think and I think like what I mean by that is just like it emphasizes how fundamental change is to this view of the world. The idea that like a living world is a world that is always changing, which kind of implies that like life is changed like fundamentally, and then like, yeah, it's always like growing and evolving, and like adapting to different circumstances. And yeah, just that idea that like in a world that is alive, that is always adapting and changing, you will always have to adapt and change like in response to it. Like I think that like kind of like, uh going back to what Mama Pambana said, like, I've never had to live out on the street, although, I've had, challenges with like food and money and stuff before. But I think acknowledging that I live in a living world means acknowledging that that is possible for me, like that is never not an option, like, and even though I can't see a path to that right now, many people can't, and yet they still end up there, depending on just like how things play out and how circumstances go. So, yeah.
That's interesting to me. So when you think of living world, you're looking at it just through the example you're saying. You're looking at it as there's a possibility for homelessness, there's a possibility to starve, there's a possibility for demise.
For anything, yeah.
Absolutely. And when I think of living world, even through all the tale that she's telling here, when I think of the living world, I guess I keep looking at it as it's there's an opportunity always for access. There's an opportunity always to find it and go get it. Just based off this kind of, even though in this really jacked up situation, they were always finding it and going to get it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, not kind of like, it's exactly, there's always resilience. As long as there's a living world, there's always this
Sure.
opportunity to jump off and go get it, go do it, go make it, work around it. So it's just like living world is resilience.
It's all that. Yeah. It's both. Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on that point? See, what else did we have in chapter 13? Um, yeah, what about this piece, this exchange between like Lauren and Curtis, where they're trying to kind of try to navigate their different I think it's an interesting dynamic because like clearly there's a lot of love for each other, but at the same time, at one point, Lauren's like, how could I ask you to subject yourself to the life that I'm considering subjecting myself to, But then at the same time, she's not even sure that she wants to go through that because now it's like, I had planned to leave the community when my dad was still here and he could still take care of my family, but now that that's not an option, maybe I need to stay, maybe we should stay here and get married, So yeah, I wonder if anybody had any thoughts or any reflections as they were reading through that part of it. Anybody ever had to navigate a tough decision like that with a loved one?
There we go. I'm like trying to get myself off of mute. But yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, I feel the struggle. I guess I just felt her struggle because it's like she really cares about this person, but at the same time, she's not sure of what she wants to do herself because um maybe she just feels like this is either hasn't been done before or this is just it's something that's so different than what she's used to. And I feel like that's why we struggle with like bigger decisions because we're so used to things being a certain way and we're used to making like these same decisions. But when we're presented with a whole new, set of things and we, think it's exciting and it's something that might benefit us, but at the same time, it's like, this is so different than what I've done. What if it's a bad idea? What if, I get caught out? What if I'm out there and, something happens to where I should have just, you know, kept to my old routine or my old life. So it's like I feel like even in my life, it's like even making the decision to move states, like it was very much um, this move could benefit me in X amount of ways, but at the same time, what if it, doesn't? And I just should have just stayed where I was, where I was, and just kept, doing what I was doing. So
Yeah.
that was my kind of like my take on it. It's just like, sometimes you damned if you do and you damned if you don't. So you might as well just do something that I just feel like, yeah, just do something that you're um something that will help you grow versus just something that will keep
Mm,
you where you are, you know?
yeah.
I
It
just have
also
one.
makes you think of, oh, go for it, Betty.
I just have one quick comment, and that is I see this as that pull we all have between our responsibilities and our own wants. So maybe we want personally, she'd like to go off with Curtis and get married, but the bottom line is she has responsibilities there. So now she's tugged between responsibilities versus what might be good for me. So, and I think we all go through that at different times versus do I want to stay in Indianapolis because my whole family is here, or do I want to do something else? So we all have these tugs at us of responsibility versus what we might personally want to do.
I
Yeah,
think
and I
it's also,
Jeremy.
okay, cool. It also reminds me of the song Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. You know how she's always talking about getting in a car and driving off. But that like ultimately it is those responsibilities like her father and stuff like that that keep her in the position she's in, although she always wants to get out there and do something else. Appreciate you. And just like in my own experience, I think the relationship with her dad points to the importance of having like some kind of foundation when you are looking to make a big change. Just like speaking from my own experience, I'm not from Indianapolis originally. I'm from Fort Wayne. And I came out here with at least some understanding that, like, if all goes wrong, I can always go back and live with my mom or my dad. I have a solid foundation elsewhere that I can fall back on, should I really need to. And I think you can see that in other areas of this space. Like we got a brother Keenan who's out in LA right now. And I would make a strong bet, a strong argument that, you know, part of the reason he's able to go out there is because he knows he has a strong foundation between, the people at Kepra and his family, et cetera, that brings some level of comfort to like, okay, now we can make a move and we can go out here and do something and explore. And, if all things go wrong, then, we have somewhere that we can fall back on. We have community that we can fall back on. And, at the same time, that can also be something that stops us from going out and doing things. And in this case, with her father, her father was ultimately that place to return to, was that place where she felt she was understood. And after he was gone, it's like, damn, can I really go out here and explore and see what happens? Because the foundation that she relied on was no longer there. So she didn't have a platform to work off of. to do something different. And then but it's interesting because in the same way, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit further in, is that it also works in the other direction where if you have absolutely no platform and nowhere else to go, then it's kind of like, okay, we're at rock bottom. Now we got to make something happen so that way we can do something to get out of this particular situation. So it's that balance between comfort and uncomfort when it comes to making that big leap and that big decision.
Yeah, I like that quote that Cass gave. Sometimes you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So just do something that helps you grow. Were you going to say something, Mama Pambana?
No, I think Jeru kind of really hit on everything. And the only thing I'll say is that, like she's what, 18?
Yeah.
So, I mean, she doesn't, other than living in her community, doesn't really have much experience. And she's living through a time where there is no, I mean, even if she's uncomfortable, there isn't a like sort of known thing to go to. She has no idea what's on the outside, what it's going to be like, how it can turn out, but she knows that the way they're living, they can't continue doing it. And I think, unfortunately, most of the people there won't listen to her either about that, because they're afraid to consider the worst case scenario and what they would do. So it is very challenging for her in the context of if you love and care for community, what to do in a situation where things are deteriorating and you don't know what's out there and people won't listen to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to me, it also speaks to that verse at the beginning of the chapter. There's no end to what a living world will demand of you, because it's like, you know, I think it's like, it almost to me is like the world is tugging her in different directions. And, and now that I'm thinking about it, we'll see that sort of like the decision kind of gets made for her in the next chapter, but I think that it's like, you know, on the one hand, the world is saying, hey, this community is falling apart, it's bleeding out slowly. And if you want to survive, you might have to go, but at the same time, it's saying, but for now, you still got people here that need you and need your help, so you gotta think about your responsibility to them as well. And, maybe in some ways, the hardest part of it is just having to make that decision, sort of like what Jeru was talking about. It's like sometimes it's hard to know like what it's hard to know when like you got all these options on the table, it's hard to know which way to go. So yeah.
I do
I'll
think
say not
though,
only
and
that's hard to know which way to go, I think it's hard when you realize that your path is not other people's path. And
Mm,
you're going to have to walk that path and you have to depart with them. But in this case, I mean, leaving them, she was hoping to be able to do it where, they're all still there and they're alive and to somewhat doing okay. But I think, that's the real challenge. And then I think all of us have had at some point in our life had to decide, you know, based on how we're raised and um I guess socialized, what things are expected of us, are presented to us that don't serve us. And even though we love family and it's gonna cause some tension or some conflict, we gotta walk our path. And so to me, I think that's part of what she's struggling with too. Like she had already decided to leave, like you said, but her family now she feels is more in need of her. So she's like, I'm thinking, well, maybe I can stay a little bit longer and figure out how to help them. But knowing that she has to leave because this is not maintainable. And how do you make a decision like that? I guess. And she didn't feel comfortable talking to Corey. Her and Corey don't get along, and she loves her little brothers and the people in the community she cares about, but it's torn between what she knows she has to do and
right.
what she feels she is responsible for, how to help the people that she loves take care of themselves while she's gone. So
Yeah.
it's really difficult when you know I can't do this no more.
Yeah. What were you gonna add, J. Rue? And then we'll move on to the next chapter.
I was going to speak to a piece that Miss PB has brought into our space recently. She's been doing some like spiritual coaching workshops for the team, and spoke to the importance of like that inner voice as well. What is our spirit? What is our intuition telling us how to move in the moment? And how those more I guess when it comes to the intuition, I see that as like the mending of the conscious and the unconscious. Um, and in this particular instance, kind of like what to the point SCB just raised. Sometimes in your spirit that it's trying to move a certain way, even if the environment is telling you on the surface that that's not the way you need to be going. Or if your environment is making it that decision a lot more difficult. And I did also just want to follow up on that point, Miss PB, because you're really speaking to me, and just some of the growth I've been experiencing over the past couple years. Um, you know, Living this life and doing this work, it is difficult on top of difficult on top of difficult. And within the last couple of years, my dynamics with a lot of my friends and even to some extent my family has definitely shifted just because I'm steadfast in this particular path. And it has led to different relationships, like I said, my friends and stuff like that. I don't want to say completely falling off the wayside, but definitely not being able to hold those relationships in the same way I did before. Um, and I think, while it was difficult to make that transition, at the same time being able to make that transition or, really stepping into that transition, I think solidified and probably allowed me to double down on like, yes, this is what I have chosen to do and this is what I'm going to do. So I would also, throw out there that, um, trees and plants, they lose leaves all the time in order for the flower to come and bloom. So, I guess that's kind of how I try to see it. Um, Sometimes you got to lose those pieces of yourself in order to get to where you're ultimately trying to go. And sometimes that can, provide extra nutrition for that flower.
That is a perfect segue into this next chapter. Because I think that like what kind of like what you were speaking to me, I think kind of like to me, J. Rue, I think what you were speaking to just kind of it's this idea that like I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's just that like sometimes you can't help but make a change, um, and it's like sure you could technically choose to do something else, but it's like there are sometimes other forces that let you know that like that's not an option, and in chapter 14, uh we definitely it's actually I think that like the verse at the beginning of chapter 14 I think speaks to what you just said perfectly, Jeru. In order to rise from its own ashes, a phoenix first must burn. And burn things do in chapter 14. Burn they do. So um chapter 14, I think, is really one of the major turning points in the story. I think it represents probably the biggest shift in the status quo that we see, because it's just the destruction, like the total destruction of Lauren's community. She's kind of been talking for a little bit about how, the community's dying slowly, people are leaving, people are sort of getting picked off. And eventually something breaks. I won't go too much into the bloody details, but basically, somebody drives a truck through the gate of through the wall of their neighborhood. The neighborhood is quickly overtaken by these pyromaniacs. That's a part that I forgot to mention about the last chapter. We're introduced to this sort of it's interesting because it's basically like a culture. You know, it is an entire it's a new group of people. The pyromaniacs. You know, these people who are addicted to this pyro drug that basically makes you like you can't it basically like you it makes fire something that's like super enticing to watch to your for your brain. And she goes into this whole story about how it started out on the East Coast as like a ripoff of some drug designed to help people with Alzheimer's, and then spread through the country, and that now like it's especially prevalent in their area of California, and just a lot of the fires that they've dealt with up to this point have had to do with people on that drug. But now we see them like we haven't seen them before. We see them fully doing what it is that they do. And the reason I say it's a culture is because and I think we see this sort of like later in the chapter. It's clear that these are not people who are they have a level of awareness of themselves, and other people have a level of awareness of them. And we see that because the next day, so Lauren, the neighborhood is attacked, it's burned. Lauren watches many of her neighbors, die or be killed. She watches Corey and her brothers run away, but she doesn't quite see what happens to them. She doesn't learn about that until later. But eventually, she's got her go bag. She's got whatever she was able to grab with her when the chaos starts, and she runs out. She camps out for the night in some like abandoned garage or something, and then comes back the next day to basically find people from the outside picking through the carcass of this neighborhood of hers. And this is when I think we see this idea of this culture come to be, because the people who are picking through the wreckage have an idea of Lauren and her community that is very different than the idea that we have developed of them up to this point. As readers, we're looking at this like abject poverty that they're living in. They can't afford police, they can't afford firefighters. They're struggling to find food and repair things and take care of each other and blah, 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 blah. But when compared to the masses of like starving homeless people that live outside of the walls, these are rich people, these are wealthy people. They're well off enough to live behind a wall, and they're hoarding their resources from us. So as Lauren's going through, she steps over this one of these pyros who died during the struggle the night before, and one of the people that is picking through the wreckage of Lauren's home is like, leave her alone. She died for all of us. And Lauren says that she's never wanted to kill another human being more. I think it's very, this part is very interesting because like she refers to these people as human maggots, as vultures, as scavengers picking over the carcass of some dead thing. To her, that is true, but to them, they are, they have redistributed the wealth. They have, they're feeding themselves. They are doing what they need to do to survive, and there's nothing wrong with that to them. You know, and I think it's just this very, I think Summer, you kind of spoke to this a little bit. These different perspectives. Where you are in relationship to somebody else's situation. But we can talk about that a little bit more in a second. So, lastly, Lauren returns. She grabs a few more things aside from her go bag. She finds, she grabs some money that they had buried in their backyard, some of the fruits and stuff that they had been growing and storing, a little bit of extra ammunition. I think she gets, I don't think she grabs another gun, but I do think she gets a few more things for the gun that she does have. And then on her way back out, she finds two of her neighbors about her age, Harry, who I think was a cousin to what was their names? The Garfields, and Zara, who was a young lady who was part of the Moss family, the polygamous family that we talked about a few chapters ago. And so at the end of the chapter basically ends with them being like, all right, we're all we got for now. Let's take some time to recover from this. Harry's injured, and then we'll figure out what to do. So, yeah, let's open it up to chapter 14. What did folks feel? What did they think as they were reading through this? And then, when you have to like look at the aftermath, what were your thoughts about that?
It really made me think of what Miss PB shared earlier, just in terms of like the line between haves and have-nots
Mm-hmm.
is relative at all times. And I think it also speaks to that something, especially in this book, that I think Octavia Butler does really well is, of course, we're talking about the human condition, but I think in this case, although Lauren is our protagonist, we can see how quickly we are to um, make demons out of people
Yeah.
when they're outside of like alignment with us and our goals and what we're trying to do, how quickly we turn other people into enemies uh, rather than, trying to understand them. And of course, she's in an emotional place. She's just lost pretty much everything she knows. So that makes sense. But, even I think, calling them maggots and things of that nature shows some type of disconnect between Lauren as a human, Lauren as the founder of Earthseed, who, is kind of like proselytizing, and, trying to make a religion out of her viewpoint. But then, ultimately her failure to live up to that standard when times become emotionally challenging, because I think it's the easy argument to make that maggots are an essential part of any ecosystem. You need people
True.
to come and pick the carcass, right? So even her drawing that comparison, at least in my mind, shows that when times get tough, we don't fall back to love. Essentially, we fall back to our hatred when things really get tough. At least on the onset, right? Maybe as the dust settles, we start to come back together a little bit. But I don't think it's in human nature to start that way.
Interesting. I see Donna. I see that you just joined us. Would love to have you check in real quick. Number, color. How do you feel about change? And then Cass, I'll pass it over to you.
I would say number 7, color, maybe like a blue. How I feel about change. It's always been a really difficult thing for me. Like I know it's inevitable. But yeah, I think that I can just kind of get stuck in like things that have happened in the past and almost like memories feel like very like real and vivid. And I'm like, what do you mean things have changed since then? So I think that like acceptance is just kind of where I am with change, like my lesson for
Yeah.
change that I'm to get into.
Thank you for joining us. Cass, what were you gonna say?
Um, I was gonna say, yeah, a little bit what Jay Rue was said. Like, yeah, it's like immediately, she kind of talked down on them, even though they're just doing what they need to do to survive at that point. It's not like a lot of these people are still alive to reclaim their things, and instead of just letting these things just go to waste and this food and all this, goes to go to waste, they would rather, they take it. And my thing is also when I read that, I was like, dang, that is kind of messed up because yeah, like you're seeing people, pick over your community, and that's sad. But I was like, well, you're gonna have to do the same thing in order to survive out there because now you don't
Yeah.
have a home to go back to. So yeah, so it's like I feel like she doesn't understand what they're going through now because she really didn't have to go through that, but now that she's having to go through that, I feel like uh eventually, yeah, that's gonna have to change. And I feel like, well, spoilers, it is going to change, you know.
Yeah.
You know, as she, as she progresses, because it's like, what are you gonna do? You know, if you see someone there on the side of the road and they have, ammunition and money and and nice clothes, what are you gonna do? Are you just gonna let that, and leave that for the next person to pick up, or are you gonna take that and ensure your survival?
Yeah.
Is this about how Lauren felt when people were sort of coming through her neighborhood after did the big thing happen yet?
Yeah, the big thing happened.
Okay, okay. Um yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that emotion though is kind of tied to the fact that yeah, people like it makes sense to come through and like grab things, but also like her neighborhood was burned down. And I feel like it's hard to separate the act of like somebody did this so that they could take the things within it, you know? Well, I guess like it wasn't the same people. Because like the people who were painted like burned the neighborhood down and then like scavengers came and like grabbed things. But I think that like when the two are so interconnected, like that makes it more difficult to accept because it's like, well, yeah, these people are just like looting for resources, but it doesn't really feel like, I don't know, like I think it doesn't feel as straightforward as that because it's like they were looting for resources after somebody forcibly like burned my shit down, you know? And so it's like I'd just be mad at everybody in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking, I understood the emotion, for me, so I understood that part. I was angry at the fact I knew this was coming. Octavia did a really good job of building this up, so I was just bracing for it
Yeah.
to drop. So that entire time, though, it was just like, damn, please get ready, please get ready. So I was angry at this moment when no one could have been ready.
Mm-hmm.
I was excited that she was. And I think I understood the separation between how she saw us and them
Mm-hmm.
in that moment. And it's like in a church space for where she was at, yes, I'm supposed to think of these people as human. I understand that to a point, but even how the community spoke about it, we are here and you were there because there's a difference in how we live and how you live. So you're still the anomaly outside of the wall. You're still not as human as me.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there was ever that balance outside of understanding through her religious understanding, help those in need kind of thing
Yeah.
to an extent. So I think I was angry at that. I knew it was coming. I didn't know it was coming that way. So that was rough. But I think I also took it to all the correlations that I could draw over the times. And then I just started kind of questioning myself on what are you seeing and are you ready? Because you're
Yeah.
seeing and are you ready? And I was getting frustrated with myself because I was like, you're not, but you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of turmoil in that space in reading that chapter.
Yeah. I think that piece that she raised up about, she was ready, I think that's interesting because at one point she's like, I can't believe that at no point did we designate a meeting spot outside of the wall just in case we needed to evacuate. And she says, poor God shaping, lack of foresight on my part. And I think that terminology is just very interesting. I like one, I love the subtle ways that like Octavia fleshes out this belief system and just like the various ways that it works. And like this idea of like God shaping is like a verb to describe the things that you do to affect the way that things change. And so, like, yeah, I definitely think that there's this idea of like, she did have her go bag. She was ready to get out of there when it was time to get out of there. But still, there were things that were just missed, that aspects of it that she wasn't prepared for, maybe couldn't have been prepared for. But yeah,
I have
yeah. I want to have Mrs. Fair. I would love to have you check in, and then I'll pass it to you, Donna. Number, color, and how do you feel about change?
uh, of course I'm a yellow 10
Of course.
and feel about change. Feel. You think you can have a feeling about change other than acceptance and here we go and let's get to it. Okay, so now who
Oh,
was
that's
going to
right.
talk? Donna was going to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so real though. But I've been thinking about what you just said, Chin, of like, yeah, she was ready, but also like there's still stuff to the plan that wasn't there. And I've been thinking
Could have
about
been
that.
more ready. Yeah.
You said what?
Could have been more ready.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. Like after having made a go bag, I was like, bro, what if something hits the fan and I'm like not near my home, you know, and then all of that stuff is just like not near me. And that just kind of had me thinking of like, there's always going to be like a what if this, what if that. Like all you can do is try to be like as most prepared as you can. And I think that Lauren even experienced that in that chapter. If I remember correctly, I think that like she couldn't get to like the guns or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's like you can prepare as much as you can, but there's always still going to be something you didn't think of, something that like you wouldn't be able to get to even if you thought of it. And that's kind of scary, but also I think that comes into like the acceptance of just like you gotta be adaptable.
Yeah.
It makes me think of that quote, "Man plans, God laughs."
Mm.
Uh,
I also think it reminds me of Lauren's earlier conversation with Joan, where she's basically like, I'm learning everything that I can to survive out there, and know that it won't be enough, you know? I think it's yeah, I think it's I think somebody pointed it out earlier, but like you can always be more ready, you can always be more prepared. There's never a guarantee that the plans that you do make will be like enough, but yeah, yeah. One more thing that I wanted to speak to before we sort of move into the next chapter. I just wanted to touch back on this piece about like human maggots and vultures. And I guess really yeah, we don't get into this like for like it's like not until chapter 16, so we'll come back to this then, I'm sure, but I think there's this very interesting sort of humans as. Thank you guys for joining us. Humans as animals is definitely a pervasive theme throughout the story. She talks like in this chapter, she talks about maggots and vultures. In chapter 16, she talks about, she compares her group to a pack, like of wolves or something, a pack of dogs or something like that. She talks about human predators, you know, and I think that the effect that that has for me, and maybe we can, keep talking about this and exploring this as we get through it, is this idea that the real relationships that humans have with each other are much more complicated than just like good and evil, right or wrong, these like simple ideas of morality, because yeah, Lauren has every right to be mad at these people for destroying her home and killing all of her neighbors and stealing all of her stuff. But, you know, who is to say that those people don't have an equal right to hate these people that they see living in this walled community, these people that still have jobs, and still have houses and clothes and all that, and it's just like and there is no right or wrong about it, there's just I think it goes back to what that quote about all struggles are effectively power struggles, and that it's really just who's gonna make the change, who's really gonna uh, 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 who's going to most effectively create their version of the world, and there's no right or wrong to it. There's just what happens. The last thing that I want to say that really like struck me about this chapter before we move on to chapter 15. I don't know if anybody's read Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston, but it's the story of Cudjoe Lewis, who was the last, or basically at the time was the last living survivor of the slave trade. You know, he could remember the day that his village was raided. You know, he could remember being uh, uh, enslaved and transported to the United States and working on a plantation for 5 years before emancipation came. And what struck me about that was just the story of the raid on his village that, you know, ended up in his enslavement was very, very similar to the scene that Octavia Butler describes in chapter 14. You know, this community that's caught by surprise, their defenses are completely overwhelmed very fast. You know, the brutality of it, you know, because his village was attacked by the Dahomey, you know, and they don't play at all, you know. So um, and so I think like to me it just like it made it clear that it's like obviously this is, well, maybe not obviously, but like, you know, I don't think that any of us would disagree that like this is a horrific scene, but it's just real, you know? It's just like that in real life, you know? And I think, you know, I think we've talked about this before that, but I think a lot of what we expect reality to be like is very much shaped by what we're used to, you know? And so I think it's just it's important to remember sometimes that it can get really, really ugly, you know? But
Well, I also think, you know, which I, again, if how do I say it? Well, human beings and how we live and how we interact, there's a spectrum. And I feel like a lot of times we think that the way we see and view the world is how everybody else should see
yeah,
and view the world. And even though we may feel that way, we have to remember that that's not the case. And
true.
so where I might say something is wrong, if I'm in another group, it's right.
Yeah,
And if they don't share my morals, my values, my principles, and I don't realize that, and I don't think about how to protect myself and my community and those kind of things, then I'm putting myself in a position of being prey. And
mm-hmm,
so I think, you know, even in her community, when she was trying to talk to them about, you know, hey, we need to be preparing because this is not going to last, they didn't want to look at, you know, how bad things could get because they felt that, you know, like they lived with a certain code, even though they didn't always like each other. And they were, and then again, in the sense that you don't want to, how do I say it, label everybody as bad, but you do need to realize that everybody doesn't move through and see the world the same way you do.
yeah,
And then when you come in contact with them, if you don't have the ability to protect yourself and they're stronger or they got weapons and they had a big armored truck and they had automatic guns and all that kind of stuff. So again, I think part of it is, which we don't really think a lot about, is that we have to never lose sight of the fact that our value system, our beliefs are not shared by everybody, and that we need to be able to try to think about where we are, who we're coming in contact with or may come in contact with, and how do we protect ourselves without necessarily, uh, I guess I would say, violating our principles unless we
yeah.
have to. So
I think that that sentence I love, we always have a really good transition, I think, because like I think that that idea is explored very deeply in a lot of ways in the following chapters. Just this idea of like how do we protect ourselves without becoming predators, you know? So chapter 15, oddly, funnily enough, opens up with the verses just kindness eases change. In this chapter, we sort of learn a little bit about how Harry and Zara made it out of the village. We learn that Harry has a concussion. He sustained a few other injuries, but ultimately, like that's the worst of them. Like on their way out, and they just kind of like take turns watching him and keeping watch over him while he recovers. Um, Zara, tells the story of their escape, how, she watched, her child and some of their neighbors die. And, she was attacked and assaulted by one of the pyros, but that Harry, like, saved her and, like, helped get them out. And so they kind of like, the three of them make a plan to travel north together. Lauren decides that she's going to travel as a man just because it's a little bit safer to have a group that's like two men and one woman versus like two women and one man. We also learn a little bit more about Zara. We learn that I think, or maybe we don't like get her full backstory here, but we start to learn that she has come up. She was not raised in this community. She spent a lot of time in her youth out on the streets, and so she has a little bit more familiarity about like how to navigate that. And so Lauren's basically, as they're sort of like deciding, okay, we're going to travel together, there are risks to that, obviously, but ultimately we all agree that we're stronger as a small community than we would be as individuals. And Lauren lets Zara know that it's like she says, everyone who's surviving out here knows things that I need to know, so kind of like getting back to this idea of like you can always be learning, always preparing yourself a little bit better. And particularly she's like, because Zara, because you have this experience and these skills, I'm going to lean on you to teach me how to survive out here. um we learn a little bit about Hanning Joss, this like chain of stores that still like operates in the area. And just like, they've obviously, kind of like Mama Pambana was talking about, the only reason that they can do that is because they can afford to pay and arm guards, and they have very specific rules about what you can and can't do when you come to shop at their store. So they stock up a little bit, and then they hit the freeway, start heading north. And here they see, then here's where we first kind of start to see the idea of these human predators. We start to see these people who are preying on the weaker, isolated other people moving on the freeway. They had that encounter that night at their camp where those two men, come and try to, rob them and attack them and take their stuff. And obviously they fight them off, but there's still that piece around, just like, we got to be aware, we got to be alert, and we got to be adaptable. So, any thoughts on chapter 15? Maybe especially around this verse, this kindness eases change piece. Any thoughts on that?
I didn't necessarily have a point for that, though. I did find, I don't remember who exactly said it. My apologies, but somebody brought up, is it possible to be out there without becoming a predator? And I find that kind of ironic, honestly, given that human beings, again, I would say like by nature are predatory. You got to eat to live. So we are always preying on one way or another something, be it plants or other animals, etc. And I think the piece around like moralizing it, like is it good, is it bad, has to do more with like how much can we empathize with that being or that creature. Like I can't really empathize all too much with a tree. I've never been a tree as far as I can remember. Now I might have been a tree in a previous lifetime or an upcoming lifetime. And to some extent I can kind of empathize with like a deer or a chicken or something like that, but I don't. But we also don't make a whole lot of qualms about going to the store and buying a chicken, or even raising one and slaughtering it so that way we can eat it later, or taking its eggs or things like that. So I try to take a yes or no approach to moralizing, and I guess kind of around like what Miss Pambana was talking about, where you don't want to assign like, oh, these are bad people, but you do want to say, yes, there are some people who might seek to harm or take advantage of this community or of me. And how do you respond to that properly? So I just wanted to say that piece on what was shared a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I think the way you frame that is really deep because I think what it says to me is that it really comes down to context, um, because in some cultures, some places, there are some animals that you don't touch. Um, and here we're seeing a context where like truly nothing is off limits, not even people. Um, but I think it really always does come down to it's like, okay, well, what are the standards that, you know, what are the what standard is best going to help me survive here? What standard is going to help me get to tomorrow? Yeah, so that's definitely interesting. Definitely interesting. Any other thoughts on that piece?
Um, I really think about how in that pathway that Lauren took, I think about how her brother, her little brother, was
Mm-hmm.
out there, and he came back to see them, and he had on these nice new shoes, and she wondered, is he one of the predators out there
Yeah,
taking the, you know, took somebody's shoes and hurt them in order to get the shoes?
yeah,
And then here she is out there with the young man and his wife and the kid, and they come across other people along the way. And maybe, I mean, there probably are people who don't have any scruples about hurting other people, but and that leaves them alone, and that aloneness, because they're an individual who who can be uh, who can be disposed of by another person, even if they're in a group of people. If all of the people in that group feel like predators, their job, the only way I can survive is to take from other people, then that does not leave them communal.
yeah,
Because they take from others in order to survive. And I
yeah,
think that it, living in community, we all have, if any of us have, then it gives you a day to day, the word isn't peace, but I guess it's just less anxiety. Now, the whole group can be wiped out, as with slavery, when the slavers would come and take, almost everybody they could catch in the village. The whole group can have a demise. But in your daily walk in life, to keep that kind of anxiety, kill or be killed. And so I'm just saying that when you were talking about people being predators, when children come up to kill or be killed, eat or be eaten, they come into a community not being able to be with others, so that their day to day has their day to day gives them a place. I can almost say like respite. When Lauren had the whole little group together, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead, the fire sprang up, and the smoke and the heat was devastating. We haven't gotten to that part yet, right?
no, not quite.
Oh, okay. So I'll come back from that. When they were a little group, and the older gentleman had the grocery cart pushing his stuff around in it, he was alone out there. He knew he needed to be in a group, and even this little motley group with a baby was
Mm-hmm.
better than being out there by himself.
Yeah,
And so when you talk about being prey or being a predator, um, it if, at least when you're in community, somebody has your back, and you all are fighting for survival together. And so
yeah,
that's the one piece I give to um, to putting yourself in a position to be in community. If I have, we all have the old Ubuntu thing. It speaks to
Paulette,
that.
I want to ask you, how does that, how do you look at that compared to, I feel like slavery and slavers was a group of predators.
Yes, they were.
Like, the Holocaust and the Nazis were a group of predators. And I feel like we got, predators in the United States now who say the power goes to the strongest and the fittest. So to me, they got community, but their belief system is different. So I'm just wondering, how do you square that? Or how do you look at and think about those two? Because they not alone. It's a whole bunch of them.
And I was saying earlier that when you live in community as an individual, when you live in community with individualism and dog eat dog, when you live in community, I'm thinking about this movie that was the Cloud movie. And in the second part of that was we had returned. The civilization we have right now had fallen apart. And we were now human beings living in trees. And there was this non-militant group. And then there was another group of individuals that would come and raid them. Not take the people, maybe take the women, but they would come and take things from them. So the militant group, I'll just call it the predator group. They just weren't militant, they were predators. All of them were real dirty, and they didn't have running water. This is what we had come to. So the predator group, each one of them lived as an individual. They were in a group, they were a whole community, and they would come and get whatever they gonna get, whatever they needed. They would come to the group that didn't have the arms, and they would finally wear down their fortresses or grab them up or however they did it, because the predator group, had the weapons, and they each lived as individuals every day. And so I'm just saying that I'm not saying that those people are not going to exist, and they're going to exist in communities. But to live in a community where if I got, you got, to live in a community where if it gives you every day to have a piece of others around you. It gives you a peace and a place to be. Whereas when you run in with a group of predators, like you well know that if you're working with Trump, you could very likely.
You might be next.
Yes, yes. You can never be at peace with Trump. I know that Zelensky came in here and thought, as the president of his country, that he was going to work with Trump and get and just sign over all the minerals in Ukraine. He couldn't even get that done with Trump. Trump still stabbed him in the back. So I'm just saying that you're right. Predators run, wolves and hyenas run in packs. So, but when you live in community where you're not a predator, it's not like you're not going to die one day. I mean, don't nobody get out of here alive. It ain't if, it's when. So when you are living in a when you're living in a non-predator group, and even the predators wind up being prey many times to the people they in community with. So it's just that if you're going to be a predator or prey, and everybody going to be prey some kind of way. If you're going to be live in community and just have, I mean, like right now, at 82 years old, I live over here, but I don't live alone. I don't have no fear about nothing. I mean, shit could always happen. I could fall down the steps, have cancer, whatever, but I can live in peace in my individual day work, and therefore I can work on other things. I don't have to just keep looking for who am I going to kill so I can, or who am I going to be mean to so I can feel like I'm in charge or I got power
Or who's gonna come kill me? Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying, you right, Pambana. Those people, I mean, Trump, he is putting everybody around him. He's changing up the military. You have to have loyalty to him to even be in the military. So the military won't even be one of the United States. It'll be a Trump military. Oh yeah, they hang out together. Ooh,
I
yeah.
wanted to
I just
I
want to
want
say,
I
Miss
want
Fair, that's not really a fair comparison. Because while yes, you might be an 82-year-old, you are not the average 82-year-old. They would bust in there and they would learn that they messed with the wrong lady on the wrong block.
Mrs. Fair is
Thank
the
you,
big
dear.
dog. I wanted to speak to that a little bit and maybe move us into the next few chapters. And I'm gonna try to condense chapters 16 and 17 together just for the sake of time. But in chapter 16, this idea of like how to live in a dog eat dog world really like comes to the surface, and this is when that idea of, well, like Harry at one point is like, we aren't animals, and Lauren's like, well, we kind of are out here, we're a pack, and if we're going to survive, we have to survive as a pack, and we're not the only pack out here trying to survive, and so the verse at the beginning of that chapter is, earth seed cast on new ground must first perceive that it knows nothing. And so I think that like what that means is really just that, like, we're in an unfamiliar environment. We're not used to living in a space where we are this vulnerable to being preyed on, so we have to adapt. And that means that we can't be as generous as we would like to be sometimes. Maybe we do have to be a little bit more wary of people than we'd like to be, but that's the price that you got to pay to survive sometimes. So they start getting to know each other a little bit more. Their dynamic sort of starts to we start to see their dynamic starting to take shape. Zara and Lauren kind of start to bond just because they both kind of have what I see as like a warrior spirit. They're both like, we're gonna survive no matter what we have to do. Zara because she's been there, Lauren because like that's where her faith has taken her. Harry's a little bit more reluctant in that way. Just because I think he's a bit more attached to his worldview and his ideology. But I think that ultimately, like, he's still invested enough in the group that he's willing to set some of those things aside, although he does sort of like complain and push back. But ultimately, he's like, he wants to survive as well. He's just not sure what that takes in this environment. But the verse at the beginning of chapter 17 is embrace diversity or be destroyed. What that's the sum of the verse. The actual verse is longer, but that's the last line of it. And so in this one, we kind of start to see more and more of these disagreements sort of start to take, these different approaches start to take shape. Zara and Harry get close, they get real close. And Lauren kind of has to confront them at some point and let them know, like, hey, y'all can't be getting nasty on each other while y'all supposed to be keeping watch, like that's dangerous. Stop that. But I think that like at the end of the day, they're still trying to navigate these differences that they have. They start to learn a little bit more. Like Lauren starts to tell them a little bit more about Earthseed. We learn a little bit more about Zara and what she knows. She gives them that advice about like you can suck on a peach seed to help yourself feel less hungry. And when you're searching a dead body, these are the places you look because this is where most people are most likely to hide things. Kind of that gruesome stuff, that hard stuff, but that necessary stuff. And then we get to one of the pieces that Mrs. Fair was talking about. They show up to this water station and they save this mixed couple with the baby, and from getting their stuff stolen, and then the couple kind of follows them for a while, and they kind of stay separate until they all make it to this beach. And that night while they're camping, a pack of dogs comes, and the couple's a smaller, weaker group, so they get preyed on. And one of the dogs starts to take their baby, but then Lauren's group saves the baby. They bring the couple into sort of like their pack. They grow from 3 to 6, including the baby. And we learn that this family, their names are the Douglases, Travis, Natividad, and I forget the name of the little baby. But yeah,
Dominique.
so Dominique, thank you, Mama Pambana. Yeah, so we learn a little bit more about them. And yeah, and so we're starting to see this community kind of grow, and like through these chapters, they're sort of navigating this dynamic of like, well, we got to do what we got to do to survive, but how far are we really willing to go? And it's just kind of like a question that they kind of have to, even when they're considering like, should we bring the this man and woman and baby into our group? There's this idea of like, well, if we're a bigger group, technically we're a little bit less vulnerable. But if we have a baby in our group, that makes us more vulnerable. We don't know these people. They don't really know us. They might take our stuff in the middle of the night. Like, oh, well, they haven't tried to up to now, so why would they? But eventually they do decide to take them in, and they kind of welcome them into their community that they're starting to build. So I'll open it back up. Any reflections from chapter 16 or 17? Maybe more on this idea of just like how to live in a dog eat dog world without like how to survive, how to do what you got to do without completely closing yourself off. I wonder if anybody has any thoughts about that from these chapters. Maybe if anybody has thoughts on either of those verses as well, this idea of like cast on earth seed, cast on new ground, must first perceive that it knows nothing, or embrace diversity or be destroyed.
Yeah, I guess I'll speak to that about the diversity. And I feel like, in the way she crafted the story, like she put together people initially, like to me, um, Lauren was kind of more of this thinking, planning individual. And for her to put Zara in there, who had experience about being on the outside, that was diversity in the sense of one, she knew what it's like and she had those experiences and she could kind of coach them. So to me, it's like really trying to show, and then by having Harry, which is like, if there were two women, they would have been perceived as more vulnerable. And like she said, dressing as a man and being two men. So it's kind of like just looking at how the aspects of the people in the group, their strength, their skills, their knowledge come together to help them protect itself. Um, I guess that's what I'll say about it. And then you get to hear a little bit more about their stories and things like that, and some of the things that they know how to do, like who knows how to shoot, who knows how to read, those kind of
Hmm.
things. So yeah.
Yeah. And then I think there's also like this idea of, the skill share starts to grow as well. Zara's teaching them these things about like, yeah, like you said, Zara's like, here's some quick and dirty tips for how to survive on the street, and Lauren's like, that's great. Let me teach you how to use a gun because, we might need to. Yeah, yeah,
You asked her to teach her how to read too.
yeah, right, right. And yeah, I think that there's this very real thing about just like, it reminds me of this conversation we've had on the knowledge illusion, that like not only are other people a way of accessing knowledge that you wouldn't have access to otherwise, if I don't need to know how to shoot necessarily if I got somebody next to me that does, but also if I do need to know how to shoot, then, you know, if I need somebody to teach me, at some point. So just this idea, like the more perspectives and skill sets you bring into your group, the more adaptable you can be, in some ways. Because it definitely having more people trying to make decisions makes adaptation harder too. Definitely, definitely, definitely. Yeah. What about this? It's interesting because the Douglases are really, I think, the first strangers that their group kind of interacts with that is not in like in a hostile sort of not in kind of a hostile relationship, I think these are really like the first friends they start to make on the outside. Um, so yeah, I wonder if anybody has any reflections on just like how they see that, how they saw that decision kind of getting made.
The only thing I'll say is that in that that's where again to me the strength that Lauren has about planning and trying to be observant of people and thinking about
Hmm.
what would make them more secure because I think, she talked to the group about it and they were like, what if they'll steal our stuff and things like that. But she was like, you know, the more we have, the stronger we can be and those kind of things. And she went over and they didn't trust her initially either, but she said, hey, and I always kind of like that about her too. Like she just puts stuff out there and she said, but you make the choice. You decide what's best for you because only you can do that. And then
Yeah.
she went back to the group. So I feel like that's one of her real strengths is, trying to think about what's going to really strengthen the group and make them more resilient and be able to sustain themselves. And then the others have skills that can contribute to that. So,
Yeah. And I think like to your point, she's also looking at like what other people need as well. Um, so it's like, for example, it's like, you know, I think that like maybe she feels more comfortable going to the Douglases like, hey, you know, you guys should join our group because she also understands that like having more adults in y'all circle makes y'all safer too. Um, yeah, I wonder. I haven't heard from Alvin, Tara, or Am. I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on chapter 16 or 17.
Go after you.
My thoughts are Pambana thoughts. Same page.
Lovely.
don't be sharing my thoughts, share your own.
You shared my thoughts when you shared your thoughts.
I can jump in here. I think that what the two chapters 16 and 17 remind me of is just like this collective decision making, especially in operating in a new environment, like an unfamiliar territory, because it's like, you have the disadvantage, or it's the advantage in a sense where it's like you don't have the familiar environment to operate out of. So every decision that you make, especially in their circumstances where it's based off of like their daily survival, is like vital. And like even to that the point somebody had made about like that collective skill sharing and stuff. It's like, making decisions to be like, okay, like what skills are we going to teach each other and stuff like for that are going to be vital to our group survival. Um, and then just even like the conversation of like, okay, are we going to bring in this couple and their baby and stuff? Like, what are like the risks or the pros about that and stuff? But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just interesting how we operate.
I'll just also say that to me, it's an example of how trust is built and it's over time and it's through these interactions and collective decision making and protecting each other and enjoying good times together too.
Yeah.
I had one comment to make, and that was
Please.
through this, all of a sudden, we're seeing what a leader Lauren is. Here, she's the youngest in the group, and she's with all these adults that have lived a long time, but yet everyone seems to listen to her, and she seems to take command of everything. So I guess to me, I'm thinking about how some people just are natural born leaders, and people just happen to listen to them because they just do, just because of the confidence and the things that they say. So that's kind of what hit me when you're talking about all the diversity. You have diversity, but you also have to have a leader and someone that people listen to and that respect. So that's what I thought about.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's like yeah, I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I don't think I necessarily I think as long as we've known Lauren, she's definitely had very strong leadership qualities. But I think we also see that like those are things that she's like learned from people over time. Like I think that there's a actually this is getting us into our last chapter for today a little bit, chapter 18. Um, they take a rest day. You know, they find a beach in Santa Barbara that they can like chill out on for a day just to, you know, catch their breath before they resume their journey. And something that's interesting about this is that the people here are a little bit nicer, a little bit more friendly, a little bit more welcoming. You know, I think it kind of like lends to this idea that, you know, it's a complex world that Octavia Butler has written, much like our own. And, you know, the disastrous scenario in some places may not be the disastrous scenario in other places. You know, there are still like some fires and there's still like a lot of like poverty in this place, but like the people all in all seem to be in a much better place like spiritually. You know, they're connected still a little bit better. So I think that, you know, that's just an interesting thing to observe. But this in this chapter, you know, we start to see the group exploring Earthseed a little bit more. We learn about the Douglases and where they came from. Natividad was a maid for this rich family, and Travis was the groundskeeper, and you know they sort of fell in love and had little Dominique, but well, groundskeeper and maid is putting it a little nice. They were slaves, because that's like that is this is a society. The place that this society has come to is a place where that is once again um, a commonplace relationship for people to have. And so we learn about how the mistress of that house like basically gave them the money to get out because her husband was going to go from the Natividad, and then Travis was going to have to like defend her. And yeah, so the mistress of the house was like, I don't want all that mess. Y'all can go. um, but then we also start to see, you know, Lauren's sharing a little bit more about Earthseed. Travis is asking questions, which gives her more opportunity to share. And to your point, Miss Betty, I think that there are points in this exchange where we can see her like internalizing the lessons that her father gave her. You know, she's like, I really want to tell people about this. You know, I really want to go in on this, but I have to wait for an invitation so that I'm not pushing people away as I explain, you know. So but I definitely do agree that, like, you know, we see some of those like leadership qualities come out in a really strong way. And I think that the way that that manifests with Lauren is just that, like, she is really focused on the well-being of the group, you know. So she's not, you know, she's like, I think it would be great if we were an Earthseed community. I think it would be awesome if everybody in this group believed in Earthseed the way that I do. But for now, I just need us to be on the same page enough to survive, you know. So I'll answer your questions, but I'm not going to push too hard, you know, and I'm going to try to just give y'all the information that I think will help us survive. So yeah, I think that's definitely very powerful. And we sort of start to see Travis sort of come around to this idea as they sort of have these conversations, and we see this Earthseed community beginning to take shape as more and more people start to like engage with this idea and with this conversation. So the two main parts of this dialogue that I want to lift up is sort of like the last parts of our conversation for tonight is like one, this piece that Lauren says, which is like, show me a more pervasive power than change. And I think it's really interesting because it's like, when I was reading this, I think part of me was like, oh, well, you know, that's kind of a cop out, you know, because of course there's no power more pervasive than change. You can't just choose a God that's just totally infallible, but yes, you can. Yes, you can. That's the point. And but then also there's this side question of like what there's this larger debate about like what is God? You know, what does it mean to have a God is that you can personify as caring versus one that you personify as like uncaring, or you know, like how do you relate to this concept of God? What is the concept of God for? And so yeah, so maybe that's where we can settle our discussion for tonight. What do people think about this like sort of philosophical and spiritual debate? Um, Maybe not even debate, but just sort of like exploration that sort of takes place in this chapter. Yeah, yeah. I think that there's this really interesting piece where Travis is like, well, who would worship a god like that? And Lauren's like, I hope people don't worship this god. I don't think that the point of this is for you to have something to worship or look up to. I think it's for you to understand the universe and your place in it a little bit better. So I think that to me, like that is that idea of it very much aligns, I think, with my personal sort of like view and understanding. It's not necessarily about having something to admire or look up to or to ask for favors. It's about having a framework that allows you to move through the world, and to use your power, to shape it. Yeah, yeah.
I guess I'll say that I can agree with Travis when he said change is just too simple
Mm,
and that it's a lot more complex. And for me, I mean, she's 18 and then she's been raised like by her dad in this church and she doesn't accept that. But also, I feel like we're always, and I guess maybe it's human tendency to externalize and say it's out there versus it's in us or that we're all part of it and participating in and that kind of thing.
mm,
So that's kind of where I find it a little bit challenging, but it's a
yeah.
different people see it, experience it, interact with it differently.
Could you say a little bit more about what you mean when you say that change is too simple?
Well, to me, change is, I would think of change more as a process, but I don't want to say process because I feel like, and I'm still struggling with it, that whatever this is that we are and where we are and all of that that's out there, it's all one and the same thing. And it's all intelligent and it's all conscious and it's all evolving. And so, but beyond that, I really can't speak to, like, I believe, I guess I would say that I believe in, I guess I would say dimensions, realms, spheres. I believe probably even on Earth there are people who are more evolved than us. But still, that to me, and like a lot of times what I think about is can occur is that, if you met somebody and they were living, let's say, on Earth or interact with you and they had these different skills and abilities, they could do stuff and conceive of stuff that you never could even wrap your mind around. You might say, oh, that's God, because it's something beyond your understanding. But for me, I'm like, I don't know what is God, but I know that everything is intelligent, everything is conscious, everything is transforming, everything is growing or dying. But I don't believe in death, I believe in transition. So it's like change is one aspect of that. It's all of this. And what is all of this? I can't say. I can only say what I'm experiencing as a part of it.
Yeah. I think it sort of gets into this like deeper question of like that question of like what is God for? Like why do people look for something to believe in, and why do they choose what they choose to believe in? I think that that's a very, that's a question that's going to have a different answer for everybody, but yeah. In fact, I think I'd like to hear Khaled speak to that a little bit. Yeah, you get it. But yeah, I would like to hear like, I know that you have your own sort of like understanding and belief of God. So, I would like to hear what you think. Why do people choose to believe? Why do you choose to believe?
Personally, I choose to believe because, I think there's an afterlife. You know, if you do good deeds, well, not even good deeds, if you just believe and, do as he wishes, um, when you die, you get to live in heaven, for the rest of eternity. But, you don't have to, and, he's not gonna force you to, but, it's your choice. Um, but did I answer your question, or would you like me to
So,
speak more?
yeah, why do you, so I guess like for you, you basically what I'm hearing is like you choose your belief because this idea that there is a almost like that there's a reward for it. Is that right? Is that kind of how you see it? Yeah. So I guess like with that in mind, why do you think people believe things other than that?
Yeah, I think other people believe in that.
Why do you think people believe things differently?
Sometimes it just makes more sense to them. Like I have a friend that believes in Buddhism. It doesn't make sense to me. Like you have to live your life 8 times, and then after you live your life 8 times, you become
The lotus flower.
or he said you become enlightened. I was like, I just like it doesn't make sense to me really. Not that I'm trying to make fun of it. It's just like living 8 times. Like I just don't get it. Um, but sometimes it just doesn't click the way it does for other people, like math does or reading or stuff like that.
Anybody else want to speak to that question? Maybe Alvin got a Tao quote for us.
And it was on why do people think differently or something else?
Yeah, I guess like more about like, why do people choose to believe what they choose to believe in terms of and I guess like, we're talking about God, but if you wanna take it beyond that concept into others, feel free.
Don't know.
That's a great answer.
How about convenience?
What do
It's
you
convenient
mean?
for 'em. They live in a community or in a family or in a household, and they've tried to express different thoughts at different times, and it's just convenient to go with the flow.
Mm,
And their parents or someone was dragging them to church, a particular kind of church, and after about 20 years, they finally decided to go someplace and say, wow, I was believing that all that time. And now they believe something else. Why do they believe this? They added it to their perspective. And to them, with where they came from and what they know, it started to make sense. So why do
mm,
people believe what they believe? It helps them to to not go through life believing in nothing.
mm,
It's convenient. It's easy. It's easier, especially many people, to believe what somebody else tells them because they don't have any other perspective. They can't read for whatever reason. They don't. They don't have time. They don't have any books. They don't know what to read. They too busy to doing other things. So they don't even have any other. Why do they believe what they believe? Because they don't go out and get anything. They don't go out and get enough perspective to believe what they believe. They believe they do what they
I'll
I
let
don't
it. Are you
it
saying that's true for everybody?
ain't nothing through for everybody. I don't think. I don't think you can
So
find
when you
something
say a
that's true
statement
for
like
everybody.
that, that sounds like a blanket statement to me, but I'm
Well,
just
I
wondering.
didn't stop to say some people, but you're right. I should have said some people believe what they believe. I
I'm
don't
kind of
think.
in agreement with Mrs. Fair, or at least my interpretation of what Miss Fair just said. I'm in agreement with,
Mhm.
um, where belief is ultimately a coping mechanism that we use to guide and inform our realities, and like even like one plus one equals two is a belief system if you believe in something like math. And it's a
Yeah.
tool that we use to be like, okay, I have this thing, I have another thing, so now I have two things. And even, belief in higher powers are often used to guide like morals, behavior choices, what is right and wrong, good and bad. What are the actions we should take versus the actions we don't. So yeah, and that's kind of how I've always seen belief is ultimately a coping mechanism, like any other,
Yeah.
that helps us continue to walk forward in some type of direction. Um, Life has to have some type of direction in order to sustain itself. It can't just sit there and do nothing and be inanimate. So I think we use belief as that guide to say, okay, this is the next place to get to.
And I think that swamis might have a good idea, or whatever name that you put on the people who set out in the middle of on the beach, and they don't go get anything to eat, or almost like Buddhist monks who have to be fed by the people. They don't fix food for themselves. They go out every day, well, over in Buddha type places, Nepal and places like that. The Buddhist monks leave their temples every day, and they go out and be among the people, and it's the people that feed them. Well, if indeed your way of being, like I say, like the Beatles went to India and found some guy on a beach that was a famous Swami, and he sat there all day long. He couldn't tell nobody what to believe. He helped people to just think about what is it they think they believe, or he just answered all of their questions with questions. So there are people, I'm sure, out there who don't believe absolutely nothing. Say it again, but absolutely nothing. And the Swami kind of personifies that, because maybe he does believe something, but he won't tell you, because he's just there to answer your questions with another question that helps you to get back all up into yourself. So when you say, oh, what is it you believe in? Where'd you get it from? Or whatever that statement was. Of course, it's not everybody, but when people operate out of an operating system, you're born into the world to people who've come to believe what they believe because they believe it. And then by the time you get to be old enough to have a perspective other than that one, then you're starting to form your own belief. Well, where do you get your perspectives from? You know, you get them from the interactions that you have in books, and information from wherever is a way to get perspectives.
Yeah.
And people pick up a lot of perspectives, the dog eat dog perspective,
Yeah.
the kill or be killed perspective. Those are perspectives that you wind up having and believing that it's golden, or the perspective that says, hey, peace, uh, not living on the edge. Let me go find a community like that. So yeah.
A lot of different ways to look at and move through the world. Yeah. Mama Pambana, you can be our last comment because we are at time here.
I guess I'll say I feel it's kind of like the bell curve. And a lot of people fall in the middle, but there are people
Mm-hmm.
on both ends. Some people say there ain't no intelligence, no God, no nothing. We just here by accident, and they believe that. And then
Yeah.
some people say, it's what I was raised in. I have never really experienced it. And they believe that. And there are people who have been, what I want to say, initiated into different perspectives. They've had otherworldly experiences. And so they can speak to that. So to me, I just feel like, it's never one way or the other. There's multiple
Mm-hmm.
ways and multiple reasons why people come to believe what they believe.
Yeah. I think I think the last thing I'll say is just that a big part of my personal belief system and spiritual system and philosophy has to do with the Kwanzaa principles. And anybody that knows the Kwanzaa principles knows that the last one is imani, which is faith. And I think to me that speaks to just like I kind of align with J. Rue. I think whether you put your faith in science or a religion or even just the idea that there is no meaning at all to anything, and that we're all just dust on a rock floating through the void, I think that like all forms of
Just don't.
belief, even the belief in nothing is a form of faith, So yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways to look at the world and to make sense of it, but that all of us are gonna try kind of like pick what I think that we all pick what helps us move through the world in the way that we see it. And so, for in Parable of the Sower, for Earthseed, it's this idea that we live in a world that's constantly changing. And so we need a belief system that allows us to understand that, to influence that, and to not be surprised when things surprise us. So, but yeah. But yeah, I wanna thank everybody for once again another fantastic conversation. This has definitely been one of the most engaging book studies I think we've had. So it's bittersweet that next session will be our last session, but um, God is change and all things must come to an end. So when we come back, we'll be going through
Transition, must transition.
transition. There you go. So when we come back, we'll be looking at chapters. We did 13 through 18 today, so we'll be looking at chapters 19 through 25. We'll basically be going through the rest of the book. 2 weeks from now, that'll be the 19th, I believe. So yeah, I'll see all of y'all back here for that when that time comes. But thank you again to everybody who participated. Thanks again to everybody, on the live stream or watching the recording, or who just sat back and listened. Y'all are important and help us make it happen as well. As always, big shout out to the Indianapolis Recorder, longtime content partner, supporting the Mumbo Jumbo series and just like community storytelling in Indianapolis for over a century now, I believe, one of our oldest institutions. And as always, if you want to support the Kepler Institute, if you want to help us, keep the lights on in this building that we used to have these wonderful and deep and thought-provoking conversations, go to donate.kepler.org and show your support that way. But yeah. Thank y'all very much. I'll see y'all at the next one. Night, everybody.